Today's lesson, lesson 5.3, is on solving proportions. The learning goal is I can solve proportions. Let's start with some vocabulary. A proportion is two ratios that equal each other. Remember, a ratio is, for example, 2 apples to 3 oranges. So we'd have another ratio that, let's say we had 6 apples to 9 oranges. Although these two ratios look different, they're the same. They're just written a little bit differently. And these two proportions equal each other. And as we'll see in today's lesson, you can check to see if proportions are the same by multiplying opposite. And we can see that two proportions here are the same because this side here equals 18 and this side here equals 18. So once again, proportions are two ratios that are equal. Another thing we'll talk about today is equivalent ratios. Again, they look different, but they are the same. Equivalent ratios. Here's an example of two equivalent ratios. 1/2 and 2/4. When you simplify these two ratios, they end up being the same thing. Before we start our lesson on proportions, I want us to determine whether or not these two ratios are proportional. In today's lesson, we're not actually going to write the units next to our numbers. We're simply just going to write our numbers, like fractions. So, again, to check whether something is proportional, there's several different ways, but the one way we're going to use today is cross products. We're going to multiply this side times each other, and that'll give us 240. Next, we'll multiply these two numbers times each other, and we get 240. We know these two ratios are proportional because when we multiply opposite, we get the same. Okay, now, what we're going to do today, for today's lesson, is we are going to take away that number. Well, you may say to yourself, well, it's 10 because that's what we did before. But we want to solve this the algebra way. So, we're going to put x in where the square is here. And we're going to solve it just like we did up here. We're going to multiply opposite. So let's start here. We're going to do 24 times x to get 24x. Next, we're going to multiply 8 times 30 to get 240. Does this look familiar to you? This is a one-step equation here. Notice how up here we multiplied one side by 24. Then we multiplied 30 by 8. Do you remember the most important rule of equations? Whatever you do to one side of an equation, you do to the other side. And that's exactly what we did here. We multiplied one side by 24x, therefore we multiplied the other side by 24x. Let's continue with our equation here. Now we have 24x is equal to 240. We'll draw a line through our equal sign, and then divide 24 on both sides. The 24's cancel out. 240 divided by 24 is equal to 10. So therefore, our x is 10. These two ratios are equal. We're just trying to figure out what goes in the x. Okay. Unlike the previous example, where we had our two equivalent ratios with numbers on the top and the bottom, now we're missing one of those numbers. We have to figure out what goes in the blank. Remember, we have an equation here. So we're going to start off by multiplying our number times our letter. That's going to give us 18n. Next, we'll multiply 12 times 12. And that gives us 144. Next, I have to isolate my variable, so I divide both sides by 18. My 18s cancel out. 144 divided by 18. How many times does 18 go into 144? So I can do 18 times 8. 8 times 8 is 64. Carry the 6. Next, I do 8 times 1 and I get 8 plus 6, that's 14. So I get 144. So 18 times 8 is equal to 144. Finally, I write n is equal to 8. So then my equivalent ratios are 12 over 8 is equal to 18 over 12. I like to refer to this method as the heart method. Notice the shape that it creates when you solve your question. Number 2. A over 16 is equal to 15 over 20. I'll start off by multiplying my letter times my variable. I end up with 20a. Next, I'll multiply 16 times 15. 16 times 15. 6 times 5 is 30. Carry the 3. 5 times 1 is 5. Plus 1, or plus 3 is 8. Add a place value. 6 times 1 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. 0 plus 0 is 0. 8 plus 6 is 14. Carry the 1. 240. And let's complete the other side of our heart. There we go. Now, we have to isolate our a. Divide both sides by 20. 240 divided by 20 is 12. So a is equal to 12. Let's continue. Number 3. 10 over 40 is equal to 2 over p. You might be able to recognize what goes in the blank without even solving your proportion. But I still want us to go through the procedure where we get our p by itself. Let's begin by multiplying our letter times our number. We end up with 10p. Next, we'll multiply 40 times 2. It's a funky looking heart there. 40 times 2, which is 80. Next, we'll divide both sides by 10. And 80 divided by 10 is 8. So for our proportion, our missing variable, our missing number for p is 8. Number 4. We have 1 over s is equal to 7 over 35. Once again, I'll start by multiplying my letter times my number. And I get S7. Next, I'll multiply the other side of the heart. Do 1 times 35 to get 35. Next, I divide both sides by 7 to get S is equal to 5. So S is equal to 5. So here we have a table. And our goal is to figure out what goes in each one of these blanks. We have a proportional table here. And again, we're trying to figure out what goes in these empty squares here. So here's how you determine what goes in these empty squares. I'm going to pick 4 boxes and write it on the side over here. Where I have blanks, I'm going to write, what do you think? An X. Because we know these two things equal each other, I'm going to put an equal sign between the two ratios. Next, I'm going to solve just like I did up here. I get 4x is equal to 32. Next, I'll divide both sides by 4 to get x is equal to 8. So x is equal to 8. You could sort of think of this question as filling in a puzzle. Let's continue. Now we're going to pick the 4 middle boxes. So we have 4 over 16 is equal to 6 over x. 4 over 16 is equal to 6 over x. Just like our other questions, I'll begin by multiplying my letter times my number. And I get 4x. Next, I'll multiply 16 times 6 to get 96. Because whatever you do to one side of the equation, you do to the other side. Next, I divide both sides by 4 to get x is equal to 24. So we can put 24 in this box over here. We have one box left, and maybe you see the pattern. But to double check and make sure the pattern is correct, we're going to solve it just like we did these two other questions here. So we have 6 over 24 is equal to 8 over x. Feel free to pause the video and try this question on your own. I'll multiply my letter times my number. You get 6x. And I'll multiply the other side. 24 times x. 24 times 8. 24 times 8 is 192. Next, we'll divide both sides by 6 to get x is equal to 32. So we can complete our table just like this. Notice the pattern that's formed when I fill in all the blanks here. Also notice how the pattern increases proportionally each time. Let's look at number 6. We're going to solve this table, fill in these boxes here, just like we solved this question up here. So feel free to pause the video and try this on your own. Let's begin. I'll write my proportion here underneath. Next, I'll multiply my letter times my number to get 8x. After that, I'll multiply 4 times 6 to get 24. Next, I'll divide both sides by 8 to get x is equal to 3. So in my blank here, I have a 3. So now we have one box filled in and we still have 3 more to go. Okay, so let's go to the middle now. We have 8 over 6 is equal to x over 18. I'll start by multiplying 6 times x to get 6x. Then I'll multiply 18 times 8 to get 144. Next, I'll divide both sides by 6 to get 24. So x is equal to 24. And judging by how big these numbers are here, I'm thinking that this is going to be some serious multiplication happening here. Okay, so our final proportion. We have 24 over 18 is equal to 20 over x. So I'll start by multiplying 24 times x to get 24x, and then multiplying 18 times 20 to get 360. Next, I'll multiply both sides by 24, divide both sides by 24 to get x is equal to 15. Therefore, x is equal to 15. Let's fill in the rest of our table. And there we go. Our table is completed. Today, the learning goal was I can solve proportions. Today you learned that two ratios equal to each other are solved by using cross products, or as I like to call it, the hard method. We also learned that we have two ratios that are equal and we took away one of those numbers. Thanks for listening.